So welcome, my dear friends, to this session of the School of Love. Here's a question I would like to open with. A question for these trying times, but also for any time. What does it take to open your heart in a centered, balanced, non-dysfunctional, non-codependent, safe manner? I'll ask that again. What does it take to open your heart in a centered, balanced, non-dysfunctional, non-codependent, safe manner? For the answer, ask the tulips. Ask the tulips. I've been spending time with the tulips in the garden these spring days. They have arisen rapidly with the warmth, and I'm awestruck by these cup-like blossoms reaching up on their elongated stems. It reminds me of the words from Ralph Waldo Emerson. The earth laughs in flowers. The earth laughs in flowers. But it's more than a laugh, especially when you have a whole batch of tulips. It seems like the earth is having a good belly roar. But more than that, what strikes me is the flower's singular determination to strive toward the light. And not only strive toward the light, but follow it. Because whatever the direction of the source of light, the tulips follow it. From morning to the afternoon, they turn their direction to face the light as it moves across the sky. And it's not only following the light, it's as if it would merge with the light if it could. The singular determination is so strong, so overt, so opening. And if it were not for the fact that there is an opposite gesture, an opposite direction, a rooting down by the tulip into the earth, one could easily imagine that the tulip would take off and begin flying upon the wings of its petals. But it doesn't. It doesn't because of the duality of its movements. As the bloom moves upward, the roots move downwards. There's always two things going on at once in the universe of duality. But it doesn't stop the tulip from trying to reach the sun, to try and reach the source of the light. And this is what empowers it to open in a centered and balanced, non-dysfunctional, non-codependent way. It's singular determination and striving toward the light. And what if it were able to fly off and merge with the light? What if it could actually do that? It would then be unified with it, dissolved into the light itself. And the duality would be dissolved into a unity. And there would be an end of the striving. And there would be an end of the tulip. We know from experience this is what will happen at some point. The physical tulip will be dissolved back to the earth. Part of it goes back to the earth, and the life force energy will dissolve back into the field of energy. But for the time being, during these spring days, this tension, this creative tension of something growing up toward the one light, while simultaneously growing down, allows the tulip to manifest itself as a tulip. One could even say this allows it to become a self-realized tulip. It's inspiring to see the striving of the tulip, striving toward the one light with such determination, following the light so purely. And as the direction of the light changes, so does the striving of the tulip. So simply, and without any complaint or resistance, it is both passionate and dispassionate in its effort. Spending time in the garden observing the tulips, listening to the tulips has inspired me. It inspires me in my life, my own striving, to be like the tulip. On the one hand, to strive toward the one light, the one true light, to follow it, not to fly off and to dissolve myself into the sun. No, but to allow the light to empower me in opening, to open myself to its warmth, I could say the original warmth, to unfold myself, my powers, to become what the seed of myself can become in time. And to also simultaneously work in the other direction, to root myself down in the earth, to take hold of the things of the earth with my roots, my earthly part, and to transform the earth into something with form, something of beauty, something of a higher nature. This is a powerful lesson, the lesson of the tulips, who are always turned to the light, following the light, the one true light. They hold an answer. They hold the secret. But more than holding the secret, they demonstrate the secret. Because it's not really a secret. It is, as Goethe calls it, an open secret. Nature's open secret. Open to all who would listen, to hear it, telling us to follow the one light, true light, the light of true knowledge. And not every light that comes along to get our attention is the true light. Not all knowledge is true knowledge. Not all news is news. Fake is fake, and real is real. And there's certainly such a thing as false information. And how do we know? How do we know what is authentic, real, and true? How do we know? Some information is intentionally designed to attract our attention and seduce us, to seduce our attention. It tests us if we're awake, if we're thinking. Tests if we're thinking for ourselves. Testing if we are awoke in the real light, connecting to the wisdom of the light, which is what will enable us to unfold our seed potential into wholeness and wholly knowing in a centered and balanced way, not growing dysfunctional, not growing codependent, not suffering from arrested development, but becoming self-realized, fully realized. This is all part and parcel to the creative tension we stand in as human beings, as human processes, working through creative transitions. We're composite beings, composed of different natures, mineral, plant, animal, and egoic nature. Some aspects of this composite connect us more to the earth, and some aspects connect us more to the above, the cosmos. And as transitional beings, we're constantly evolving, transitioning in this tension. One could say we are caught in the middle between our cosmic destiny and our earthly necessity. On the one hand, cosmic destiny, on the other hand, earthly necessity. Feeling the pull and call of the future, while also the pull and call of each present earthly moment. a tug of war between cosmic destiny and earthly necessities, not unlike a tulip, needing to stay connected to the earth through the roots so it doesn't fly off and dissolve into the sun, and dualistically needing to push upward toward the light, or else it would remain just a bulb buried in the earth, inert, unused potential, arrested development. So within our navigation of earthly necessity and cosmic destiny, on the one end of the duality, we have these earthly necessities, which is what keeps us alive on this plane of existence. The quest for food, water, shelter, clothing, friends, mates, love, shopping. We use our sympathies and antipathies to guide us, our likes and our dislikes. Our shopping is directed by our desire. However, these forces, the very forces of the earth that drive us toward our earthly necessities, often control us, as our desires are what determine our direction. We're not free when we just live by the pull of our sympathies and antipathies, our likes and dislikes, whatever attracts and repels us. In fact, we can become slaves to this. They color our judgment with a prejudiced way of looking at things. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. We may think we are free, but in fact, we become the least free and the last place we would suspect within ourselves. And so part of our mission is to overcome ourselves, to transcend the drive of our sympathies and antipathies in living out our earthly necessities. This is part of our cosmic destiny, to work with our sympathies and antipathies, but to not be worked by them. And I will repeat a word which will take on an even more significance as we go forward. That is empathy. I'm sure it's a word that a lot of you are familiar with, but I want to elevate its significance to another level by referring to it as cosmic empathy. Cosmic empathy is the crack through the middle of our sympathies and antipathies. It allows us to go beyond those fickle fluxes in ourselves to a cleaner, clearer space of knowing. Cosmic empathy. And this empathy is not something that comes naturally. It's not naturally part of human nature, not the way sympathies and antipathies are. So we have to work at it. We have to work at empathy. But as we work at it, it becomes a part of our nature, second nature. We work this new nature into our lower nature to make it of a higher nature. The way a tulip turns earth into form, color, something alive. And this cosmic empathy is actually the doorway to our higher nature, the higher self, higher love. This is the wisdom that lives within the light. And this is all part of the plan, plant, planet. The plan for the planet, which is like a plant. And it takes a plant, a tulip, to tell us the story, which makes perfect sense. It always has taken tulips to tell the story. And it will continue to take tulips to tell the story. And in this session, with my tulips, I will tell the story. In this session, I will continue to tell the story of how consciousness can unfold when in the true light, because wisdom is in the light. And we need the light of wisdom to guide us, to guide our growth in the right way, to guide our capacities for higher cognition. And so our cognition can function on a higher level. In the previous session, we took a good look at the potential for how the human can function cognitively. It may seem complex, but in fact, it's really quite simple. And enough people wrap their head around this perspective, we could really get things rolling into the next revolution. The next revolution? What next revolution? Of course there is a next revolution. There's always a next revolution. Life is a series of revolutions. This is why the human is a transitional being, transitioning from one thing to the next. This is what the universe is about. Universe means one turning. And within the dynamic universe, there are many turnings, many revolutions. Our planet is constantly revolving, and the cosmos that created us is bringing about revolution after revolution. And of course, this means on all levels, and not just the physical level. The next revolution is the revolution of reconnection. The revolution of reconnection. And this, my dear friends, is where love in the school of love, which of course is everywhere, will find its ultimate realization and fulfillment. The seed of love will fully bloom in the wisdom of the light, that's light with a capital L, in the revolution of reconnection. I find it interesting that one of the central themes of the COVID-19 pandemic is about connection and disconnection. The buzzword heard and seen everywhere, social distancing. If you're too close, you might catch something bad from someone. If you're not close enough to others, you might suffer from isolation illness. So social distancing is a phrase that has a lot of meaning. The message set out and seen so much, do your part, stay apart, is interesting because it requires being awake, staying awake. It requires an elevation of consciousness. And so in an interesting way, we've actually seen an elevation of consciousness through this pandemic. And with that, people becoming more aware of their sympathies and antipathies, their likes and their dislikes. In other words, you can't necessarily just do what you like. And you may have to do what you don't like. Everything has to be negotiated, including within yourself. Navigating the social realm has required greater consciousness. I see this byproduct of conscience, living with knowing, as more than a byproduct, but actually a central theme to the evolution of humanity. Increased social consciousness. Greater awareness of proximity. Having to ask questions like, who do I actually need to see? When? Where? For how long? Is it necessary? But also questions like, who do I listen to? Who do I believe? What do I believe? To vax or not to vax? That is the question. And how do you know what is the right way to go? Do I listen to my family, my friends, the so-called experts? Do I listen to myself? We're back to this question again. How does one know? A very central theme in the School of Love, where both love and knowing are important components paired together in becoming masters of time and space. To become more aware of who, how, what, when, where, and why we merge ourselves, our independent ego being, with anyone else, or anything else, anything other than my own self, and to do it with self-awareness. And of course, this awareness needs to come from the higher awareness of the higher self. And so in this session, we want to continue to unpack the powers of the higher self, because this is what will lead the way in the revolution of reconnection. We've had enough leadership on Earth leading from the drives of the lower self, and we can see where that has got us. So we need to continue to unpack an understanding of the higher self, to quite literally stand under the higher self so we can understand it. And in doing this, we have not yet fully unpacked the question in the School of Love of where does the higher self come from? Where does the higher self come from? And we'll look more closely at this in this session. But first, in moving forward from where we are, it's helpful to know where we are going. It's also helpful to know where we came from. With regard to where we're coming from, is the current picture that science presents to us helpful? Yes and no. Humans used to think of themselves as offspring of the universe, of the divine cosmos, which meant we were divine in origin. But as I like to repeat from time to time, the greatest casualty of the scientific revolution, is the image and identity of the human being. And this is because contemporary science only gets its information through material cognition, which means it can only access a picture of things through the senses, sensory knowledge. Conventional science limits itself to sensory input. And through that sensory knowledge, science surmises that you and I came from a shrew. That's right. That is the current scientific theory of the moment taught in the schools, that somehow we physically descended from shrews. That after the dinosaur extinction, the landscape was cleared for those little guys to emerge and to grow up into you and me. That we are descendants of shrews. But in fact, if that were the case, it would be better to say we ascended from shrews. We grew up from shrews. Because science suggests that everything strictly grows up from the ground up. That somehow animate life emerged up and out of inanimate matter. This is the greatest unsolved mystery of science. But that logic doesn't make sense in a dualistic universe, where everything that's dynamic depends on duality. And in this case, we could say that while something is growing up, something is growing down. That would be duality. Something visible is coming into manifestation, growing up, while something invisible is growing down. Things come in and out of manifestation. And isn't that more in line with the way energy works? Isn't that the phenomenon I experience every time I throw another log on the fire? Energy that has become manifest in a tree becomes unmanifest in the fire. Isn't that what's happening every time a seed is planted? Something that is invisible comes into visibility. We did that exercise a few sessions back where we learned to tune in to the invisible life of a seed and compared that with another object like a plastic ball or stone. And it was a completely different sense to it. There was a flame-like aura to the seed. And you were using your super-sensible powers to tune into that invisible aspect. And same thing with everything that is alive. There is an invisible life to it we can't see. But as it grows up, something grows down into it. And the idea is that this spirit nature that's invisible is similar to fire, often referred to as fire or flame. And knowing this idea makes it easier understanding how things grow up because something is actually growing down. A flame of fire will always point straight up. It will point straight up on a wick. It seeks to ascend, like a tulip, pointing straight up to the fire of the sun. But in order to get a flame on a wick, it first descends down to it. The fire descends down onto the wick of the candle. The same thing with our spirit and our body. It descends down into the body as the body grows up. The body has grown up from the ground up, and the spirit in it has descended down from above like a flame onto a wick. The spirit self is of a supersensible nature, so it's not something you can detect with your senses. So it is outside the range of conventional science. But we do register the manifestation of it when it descends into a body, descends like a flame, and alights upon the physical wick of the body. And when a candle burns out, there is no more wax and wick to sustain the flame. Similarly, when the physical body can no longer sustain the spirit because of age, disease, and death, the spirit no longer has a place to alight and ascends again to where it came. And the mineral body descends back to the earth from where it ascended. This is all quite logical within a larger picture of reality than what conventional science can see. And when we speak about what descends down into the earth, we are talking about the seed of greatness, the seed of the higher self into the egg of the earth, into the egg of the ego, the lower ego, our earthly self. And the seed of greatness is buried in the earth, inside us. Any seed needs to be buried in order to grow and to die as well. So being buried inside of us is exactly the environment the seed of greatness needs to be able to unpack its potential for life. Once it has gone through the necessary step of death of the lower self. So what I'm really wanting to get at is the question, does higher consciousness come from the earth? Does higher consciousness come from the earth? Well, does fire come from the earth? No. Fire descends, as we just pointed out. If we follow the trail, fire ultimately descends from the sun. The trail of fire leads back to the sun. And where does the sun get its fire? Well, I could jump ahead and say that fire comes from the electricity of the universe, same as the sun gets its fire from the electricity of the universe. But that would lead into a whole other talk, which I won't go into now. But for now, in answering the question, where does the higher self come from? It descends from the spiritual fire of the cosmos. The spiritual fire, the original warmth of the cosmos that created us. And with this descent brings downloads of higher consciousness. And so we are coming to a point that I have actually avoided all along in the School of Love, looking at the question of the spiritual nature of the universe. I've not really talked about this in depth. However, it is really something key that needs to be addressed in these last sessions, the spiritual nature of the universe. But before we go there in this session, let's take a little run up to that big question with a little review of what we've looked at in this series. I've taken time to look at the stages of the human biography as preparatory steps towards fulfilling our potential as a mature spiritual being, a mature self. The stages of childhood being a time to build up our bodies, creating a container for the ego and ultimately the higher self to work through. Then we looked at the adult stages of sentience, intelligence, and conscience. So we develop an inner life to mediate our sense impressions and experiences from the outer realm, and to grow capacities for higher stages of cognition, which are in fact organs for the higher self. These higher stages of cognition become the organs for the higher self. Then in the previous session, we looked at how cognition works, and that cognition isn't something auxiliary to our being to get us through the day, do our job, make to-do lists, make shopping lists, figure out how to survive, figure out how to use your smartphone, figure out how everything came to be. Rather, our cognitive capacities have now become central to our spiritual development. They are the thing to work on. So for people who wonder what it is to be spiritual these days, it's as plain as the nose on your face. We have moved up an octave from one thing we live with every day, all day, our breathing, which in the older preparatory practices was all about making breathing conscious, and now to work with another thing we live with all day, every day, our thinking, and to make our thinking conscious, which may sound strange and circular, but it is just as Michael Jackson said, this is it. This is it. We are now to make our thinking conscious. Why? So we can work with it as the central feature of modern spirituality. We think, but we really need to think more about thinking to move forward as modern spiritual beings. So in the previous session, we looked at this, looking at the stages of higher knowing, starting with the material cognition, then moving up to imaginational cognition, then inspirational cognition, then finally intuitional cognition, all spelled with a capital I to distinguish these words from the way they are used ordinarily, to lift the idea of imagination, inspiration, and cognition to a spiritualized version of these capacities. And to understand these steps toward a progressively more spiritualized thinking, we looked at the elements involved in thinking. Again, quoting Michael Jackson, this is it. This is it, folks. This is it, what we need to know if we are going to be a part of the reconnection revolution. This is it when we consider the way to becoming a self-realized being. This is it, what the tulips are telling us about following the true light so we can reconnect ourselves, opening from the heart in a way that is centered, balanced, non-dysfunctional, and non-codependent. So let's take a moment to review the schematics that I made for last week, starting with the elements of cognition. Down at the bottom here, I'll turn on my nifty laser pointer. Woohoo! Found a new little techie toy. Beginning with an object. The elements of cognition begin with an object, which makes an impression on the senses. And then, second of all, there's an image of the object, a representation which the human forms of the object. You're doing this all the time. You're doing this super sensible stuff all the time. You just don't realize what's actually going on. Well, here we are making thinking and cognition conscious. Third of all, we form a concept through which the human arrives at a knowing of the object, develops an idea. And then the fourth element is the I, the you, which forms for itself an image and concept based on the impression of the object. And then we looked at the levels of cognition. And the first level of cognition, that's kind of your garden variety cognition, where you're out there in the world and have cognition based on an outer object, right? Just like we said, there's an outer object, and then the human develops an image of that, and then it develops an idea or concept, and this is all going on by your next door neighbor. No, it's going on by you, the I in you. Then moving up from material cognition, imaginational cognition, where you're just working with an image. The image may be based on the outer image of the object, but it also may just be purely an inner image. We can have images that are not based on anything external. This gets into higher cognition, when you start to receive images that are derived inwardly. That's imaginational cognition. You have this picture in mind, and then third level above that, and it is above it in a certain way, because in inspirational cognition, there is no image, there is no object. It's based on an inner hearing, it's based on an inner knowing, without any external reference point, without even an inner image, sometimes referred to as hearing the inner word. So you just know what's going on in an object or an event inwardly through this inspiration that you receive inwardly. And then fourth level is the intuitional cognition. And here it's based on this direct connection to the object, but really what I should be saying here is the essence of the object, or the spiritual nature of the object. It's more than an idea. An idea is at the level of inspirational cognition. When it's intuitional, you are in it, and it is in you. You have this direct knowing, and in fact, you are directly connecting with a spiritual essence, or you could say a spiritual being. Because in a moment we're going to unpack more about the spiritual nature of the universe and the spiritual beingness that pervades everything. Just a bit more on what we looked at and how intuition at the highest level of cognition is said to take place because whatever the object, event, idea, or whatever it is you have placed your attention on, we can have precise knowing of it because the spirit in us is able to connect with the spiritual essence of anything else. Pretty nifty way of knowing. This is where we're going to need to be functioning from our higher self, because we're not going to do it from our garden variety level of being and cognition. It's going to take functioning from our higher self. These powers of imagination, inspiration, and intuition are all powers of the higher self. In fact, when we develop them, they, as I said, become the organs of the higher self, allowing the higher self to work through these organs in us into the material world. And these organs can organize information in a way which gives us higher knowledge, knowledge which is super sensible. And this is possible because there is a reconnection to whatever it is we meditate and contemplate on. This is part of the reconnection revolution. But one could say that especially that intuition is a capacity of the higher self, because the higher self as a supersensible being is able to merge with the beingness of anything else. To know it through a momentary identification You could say empathy with the spiritual essence of the other thing, the other being. This is what real intuition with a capital I is about. Anything else would be considered below that, would be considered inspiration, just an idea about the thing. With intuition, it's not an idea about the thing. You are the thing for that momentary time. It's an intimate intercourse with it on the level of cognition. Let us again turn to the wisdom of Rudolf Steiner, who is really a pioneer in this modern form of work. He says, what we first encounter on the road to the higher worlds are thus spiritual images. This is because the reality to which these images correspond lie within ourselves. Consequently, as esoteric students, we must be mature enough not to expect solid realities at this stage and to consider images as appropriate to our present level of contemplation. But within this world of images, we can discover something new. Although our lower self comes before us only as a mirror image, our higher self appears in the middle of it in its true reality. Out of the image of our lower personality, the true form of the spiritual I becomes visible. From the spiritual I, the threads are then spun out to other higher spiritual realities. What he's saying is that as we progress in the development of these supersensible capacities, we will experience ourselves inwardly in images. We come to meet ourselves inwardly through images. But then within that, the images, we start to experience our higher self. This is intuition, where we experience our I through ourself. And then we experience from there a greater spiritual reality through this progression from a lower I to a higher I. And then, as he says, from the spiritual I, the threads are then spun out to other higher spiritual realities. In other words, because of this death and acquiescing of the lower I, the higher I can then move out to reconnect the threads to a greater reality. In doing this, the reconnection revolution begins for you. And this is where love comes in. Yes, we got to bring love in. This is where love comes in. And not just love, but love, love, love. That's what the Beatles called it when they sang, love, love, love. They got it. Because they didn't just call it love, but they referred to it as love, love, love. Because they recognized the threefoldness involved in unfolding higher love for the higher self. And this higher capacity of love, love, love is the capacity to be selfless. Selfless. What is that? It's an oxymoron, is what it is. Because ironically, in order to be selfless, one has to be a strong self. To be selfless doesn't mean you don't have a self. Not at all. We're here to grow our self, our I, which is ego in Latin. Paradoxically, we need an ego in order to overcome our ego, our egotism. We need to be a self in order to be able to step out of ourself in a selfless way. Or you could say in an unself-centered way. So we can step into the center of the other, which is empathy, and experience things from the other's center, to know it, to have spiritual intercourse with it, and then step back into our own self's center. Because this is our home base. This is where we're rooted, and we don't want to lose our rooting. We just want to gain an ability to move beyond the root and have mobility to explore things from other perspectives. And this is something that a tulip can't do. A tulip cannot get up and move around, but we can, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And it's all about love. But even more than that, it's love, love, love. And to do it, love is all you need. But in fact, it's not just love you need. This love needs to be a higher love. Higher love unpacked from the higher self. And the organs of this higher self are these capacities of imagination, inspiration, and intuition, all spelled with a capital I. Just as love, love, love is all spelled with a capital L. And this will all unfold in a centered and balanced way when we unfold it in the true light, which is also spelled with a capital L, which is to say, the wisdom of the light, because wisdom lives in the light. And on that, I'd like to repeat the meditation we did at the beginning. The wisdom lives in the light. So let us take a little break, meditation break from the talk to again bring our awareness back to ourselves, to our center, to the thing we live with all the time, every day, our breath. And with each breath, becoming more involuted. And see yourself surrounded by light. Bright, warming light all around, filling the space around you. And repeat the words, wisdom lives in the light. Wisdom lives in the light. Now see the light growing stronger. See the light coming toward your center. Light coming toward you and coming into you. Repeating, wisdom lives in the light. Wisdom lives in the light. Now with each in-breath, see the light become even more concentrated, building up a core of light at your center. Feel this light and warmth in your heart center. Hold the light in your heart center. And repeat, wisdom lives within the light. Wisdom lives in the light. With each out-breath, see a release of light outward. Releasing light with each out-breath. Light streaming out into the space around you. Feel the peace of this release. Repeating, wisdom lives in the light. Wisdom lives in the light. With every heartbeat, feel the pulse of life. pulse of light coming in and being sent out through your body and beyond. Feel the joy of this release. And repeat, wisdom lives in the light. And feel the love of this warmth as it circulates within you and without you. Love circulating in the light. Once again, repeat, wisdom lives within the light. Wisdom lives in the light. We're now going to look at how this unfolding in the light of our being is intended as part of the Plan, Plant, Planet. And to do this, I have created another schematic, a schematic of the big picture. And quite miraculously, I was able to fit the big picture all on one page. All of time into the space of an 8.5 by 11 sheet. It all fits on one sheet, but it won't all fit in one session, so we'll start with a look at it, the schematic in this session, and finish it in the next session, which is the graduation session of the School of Love. And quite fittingly, this new schematic is called the Graduations of Consciousness. And it's intended to be helpful to you in understanding what it is to make the grade as you work your way through the School of Love, which is, of course, everywhere and all the time. And it's to help you become a graduate of the School of Love so you can be officially conferred with the title Professor of Love. A Professor of Love. A professor is one who professes something in particular. You could be a professor of biology, a professor of philosophy, a professor of anything because of what you profess. So to be a professor of love is to profess love because you know love. You know love through your higher self and can know anything. Have omnidirectional cognition through this higher knowing, through higher love of the higher self. Because you become a selfless lower self and an embodiment of the higher self, which is a prerequisite for attaining the highest degree in the graduation system. So let me share with you this new schematic, which shows the big picture. Okay, so where's my nifty laser pointer? Working from the ground up, you could say. Starting here, we're going to look just briefly through these different graduations or gradations. Starting at the bottom here, we've got it. It all started with it, whatever it is. It's actually an acronym for intelligent telos. The intelligent telos is, the word telos is a word that Aristotle coined, really referring to the purpose of the creative process, the creative cosmos, that there's a purpose. So it is the intelligent telos. This is where it all began. And at the second step here, the human was an idea or image or intention of it. We are the idea of it, the intelligent telos. So the idea of human is merged with it. We're merged fully with it as an idea. The seed of the self is held by it. Then thirdly, It thought us into existence. The human is thought into existence by it. It thought us into existence. And then, fourthly, it thinks in I. The it thinks in us. We're not thinking for ourselves, but it thinks for us. Then we have the emerging human. Up to this point, we are merged, but then the emerging human, the growing self, the fifth stage, the human I thinks on its own without it. We achieve a waking state as opposed to being in kind of a dream state. Humanity was in this dreamy state with the it thinking in it. But now here, the human I thinks on its own, independent thinking in a waking state, unmerged with it as an independent self. This is where we disconnect. We become unmerged with the it that created us. The sixth stage, the I lost direct connection to it and separate from all. Sorry, I've got sheets here. Sheets for people here in the house, in the loft. Look along. My apologies. We're at the sixth stage. The I lost direct connection to it and is separate from all. We can relate to that in our current state of being, where it's both the good news and bad news that the I, ego, independent self is separate from it. It's separate from all creation. We're separate from one another. We feel that separateness. We're hurting from that separateness, but it's also a necessary step towards freedom. So then onto the stages of higher knowledge and the re-merging human. I call it not the emerging human, but the re-merging human, who is now self-directed, self-creating self. And these stages of cognition, which we've already looked at, but I'll review them again. The material cognition, where we have an object, a representation of the object, then an idea or concept, all done with the activity of the I, the you. The I needs the separate outer objective event for inner I activity. This is why we are in the material world. The material world is not necessarily bad or prison, or cell, or anything like that. It's, as we saw in the last session, the training center to develop the capacities for the higher self. Help to develop those capacities with exactness, with, in fact, scientific thinking. Material cognition is the level of scientific thinking. We develop that so we can develop precise I activity and take that with us then to the next stage, imaginational cognition, where we just work with a representation, an idea, and the I. The I works with inner representational image, but no outer stimulus. Or it may start with an outer stimulus, but then we carry a representation of that and develop our ideas and concepts through our I activity. Then step 9, inspirational cognition, where we're just working with these two elements, the idea and the I. No representation, no outer object, and the I becomes inspired inwardly with ideas, but no outer stimulus or image. This is where we have the inner hearing, the inner knowing, the inner inspiration. You've all experienced this. We've all experienced this. This is not foreign to our being. We're just now becoming conscious of our capacities so we can further unpack them and develop these organs for the higher self, so the higher self can work through us with images, inspirations, and intuitions. Which takes us to the 10th step, intuitional cognition. The I can merge and unmerge through love, through its selflessness, through its ability to move out of its self-centeredness into other-centeredness. That's the ultimate expression of love. That's why love and knowing go hand in hand. It allows the I the freedom to merge and unmerge with things. The I has direct empathic knowing of it, the it behind the all. So at this highest stage of intuitional cognition, we are unmerged, but then can merge back with it, the intelligent telos, the intelligent purpose of the creative cosmos that created us. We now have conscious waking awareness of what we're in, what has created us, and those creative powers we can work with ourselves because we are offspring of it. And then up here at the top, the I remerges out of free will with it and all. The it of the all, the spiritual nature of the universe that's behind everything. The spirit in us can connect with the spirit of the universe. Because we're a selfless self, we are a graduate with a PhD and officially conferred with the title Professor of Love. So, I'll leave the schematic for now. We'll look at it again in the next session at our graduation session. And so we see that in order to ascend not just after death, as would normally happen, with the body descending down to the earth and the spirit ascending back to the invisible supersensible realms, we need to become, in a word, selfless. And this form of selflessness is not only the higher love, but love, love, love. And this is the thing that will bring on the next revolution, the reconnection revolution, the re-merging revolution, where we can learn to move in and out of ourselves, out of our self-centeredness, to see things from many perspectives, and especially from the other's perspective, so we can know them, so we can understand them, so we can stand under them in humility with the humus, so we can truly love. Now, to close with wise words, light-filled words, I chose some wise words of Jesus from the Gospel of John, where he says, "No greater love is there than one lays down their life for the other." No greater love is there, or I should say, no greater love, love, love is there than one lays down their life for the other. And this, of course, is qualified in the epistles of the Apostle Paul, who said that we are to be living sacrifices, not dead ones. Living sacrifices. It's not about dying. It's just death to our egocentricity, which, when you do that, is going to set you free. Free you from yourself to love and know all else, all you see, because you see with the wisdom of the true light, unfiltered by your lower filters, your sympathies and antipathies, prejudices and desires. And Jesus was a prime example of this. Whether you believe in the story to be true or not doesn't really matter. It is still an example of how he laid down his life for others. He laid down his life for them. Nobody took Jesus' life from him. No, he gave it freely. He offered it up freely to the higher self. So the higher consciousness could descend down into the earth. The higher consciousness, the Christ consciousness, could descend down into the earth. It was actually the Christ who killed Jesus. Christ killed Jesus in descending down into him on the earth. No human killed Jesus, not the Jews or anybody else. It just looks that way when you look at it from the outside. But we're talking about a supersensible reality here, a spiritual initiation and activation. Jesus knew the seed of the lower earthly nature needed to die in order for the higher nature to come in. Just like the life of a tulip, alighting upon the tulip bulb in order that it can ascend toward the light with the wisdom that is in the light and to actualize all the power within the seed of itself. This is what took place. This would make actually Jesus the premier graduate of the School of Love. And maybe that makes Christ the principal of the School of Love. This is a question and an imagination to hold in mind, and inspiration and intuition. May we find our way with the wisdom of the light to do the same. Let us close this talk once more doing the wisdom lives in the light meditation. So the love assignment for session 6, called Leading with Love. First one is listen to the tulips. Go outside. Be in the sunlight with the flowers. Take time to listen to the tulips or any spring flowers springing from the earth. Are they laughing? Are they crying? What do they have to say? Don't listen outwardly. Listen inwardly and feel the corresponding parts within yourself. What is this teaching you? Love assignment number 2. What do you choose to merge with? What do you choose to merge with? Who, what, where, when, how long? And why are you merging with anything or anyone? What are you putting in your mind? What are you putting in your body? Why? Practice conscious social distancing and non-distancing. So look at what you're merging with and then do the Raksha at the end of the day to review the effects of the proximity and the merging and non-merging that you're doing. Love assignment 3. Love, love, love. Need I say more? This is all you need. And then last but not least, can you guess? Raksha. Continue doing the daily reverse review practice. Review your day from end to finish and see yourself from a higher perspective, which is really gearing yourself into the higher self. Enjoy that as part of your growth practice.